Hello, friends. Today I'm joined by Dr. Srini Pillay, a Harvard trained psychiatrist, neuroscientist, author, and entrepreneur. Dr. Pillay is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School and the CEO of NeuroBusiness Group, where he applies neuroscience to leadership, creativity, and innovation. His work focuses on how the brain shapes identity, confidence, attention, and performance. He's the author of several books, including Life Unlocked, 7 Revolutionary Lessons to Overcome Fear, and Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, which I love. And it explores how imagination and unfocused thinking can enhance creativity and problem solving. We tend to think of the self as fixed, but neuroscience suggests something radical, that the self might be a construction, a prediction model, a story the brain keeps updating. So what happens if you deliberately update it? What if you step into the qualities of someone you admire, not as fantasy, but as training? So we're going to talk about Dr. Pillay's concept of psychological Halloweenism and whether consciously inhabiting a different identity can change confidence, creativity, and even the body. Is this method acting, meditation, neural rewiring, or something more ancient than we realize? Dr. Pillay, I'm so grateful to have you on, and I can't believe you follow me on Instagram.
Thanks so much, Will. No, but I just think your account is both lighthearted and serious at the same time. I
Thank you.
feel like I feel like you have a good sense of humor, and you also have so many layers of messages that it's intriguing to see how you think. And
Thank you.
so, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's totally an honor, and you're actually the first guest in 3 years. My podcast took a little hiatus, so I'm really honored to start this season with you. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, and basically, like a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was wanting to be a pop star, and I was always singing at assemblies and always putting myself out there. I was bullied a lot in high school for it. You know, I was the student council president. I was the only boy in choir, so I always kind of stood out like a sore thumb. And I thought, like, how could I ever get a record deal? I was on Canadian Idol and they kicked me off for being too schmaltzy. And I looked that up later on. I was 16. And it means kind of like overly sentimental. And I took it to mean that I wasn't really in my body. I was 16 years old. And I'm actually looking into the room. I got to move into the penthouse a few years ago of this beautiful building here in Vancouver. And I can see the very room where they kicked me off and told me I was too schmaltzy. So I feel like I've been able to find my own path in this life, and it didn't involve winning Canadian Idol. But the thing that really helped me in my life to like manifest a record deal and move forward and play bigger was this idea of psychological Halloweenism, sort of becoming somebody else. And in 2010, I don't know if you saw American Idol with Adam Lambert.
I did,
You
yeah.
remember?
I
Yes.
love his voice and stage presence and identity. He's amazing. I mean, his voice is really, I feel his voice is underappreciated, and
Right?
I'm always confused. Well, I think there are so many different dynamics that go on in the music industry that at some level I understand that he chose a particular path and to be exposed in a particular way. But I was surprised that he was not more often in the top 10, Billboard top 10, because his voice is pretty powerful.
I
And I have to
totally
ask
agree.
you about the schmaltzy comment. You
Yes.
know, so when you got that comment, did you like think that was the truth, or did you think that was their truth? And
That's a
like, do
good
you
question.
still think of yourself as having been overly sentimental? And what is overly sentimental? Like real or uh, so I don't know. When I hear
That's a
it,
really good
I
question.
I feel like if they thought you were overly sentimental, then they had a certain standard for sentiment, which is such an unusual thing to expect from an artist. Uh,
That's a really good point. And like for context, it was the early 2000s, the Canadian music industry, all we really had was Nickelback. So sort of like rock music. And here I come in singing a ballad that I'd written. Like I made it pretty far, top 75 out of I think 3 or 4 thousand people. But then the Simon Cowell type judge, they kind of tried to replicate American Idol, so they got this really nasty guy, and he's the one who said it. The only thing I can think of is I was so young and I wasn't really in my body. And now that I teach sexual kung fu and I can feel my nutsack, that would have been really helpful to have that grounding in the lower body so that the emotion that I was conveying was even more grounded. I kind of think of like performers like Ricky Martin or Sarah McLachlan, where it's like they're almost singing from their balls or their vagina. But overall, yeah, schmaltzy. I was like, I don't know if that's necessarily what I am or that's my truth. Yeah.
Or also, like, I understand why for some people that would be a preference not to be schmaltzy, but sometimes you have schmaltzy people who are genuine and sweet and want to be vulnerable and wear their hearts in their sleeves. And what's not to appreciate about that?
Thank you. Thank you for that reframe. And I think part of it was maybe like the Canadian industry of music was not really ready for that type of performer back then. And I do remember them saying, you'd be far better doing Broadway or doing some kind of musical theater. And about 2 weeks after I got kicked off, I actually won a scholarship to a musical theater academy in New York City. So I ended up getting to study theater, and that was really helpful. And that's actually how I got into yoga because one of our acting teachers was like, you guys have to do yoga. It'll make you like more present and like a better listener. But yeah, like when I saw Adam Lambert win American Idol or get second place, I saw a bit of myself in him because he's like, a little bit flamboyant, a little bit schmaltzy. He's into dudes. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was about to, apply to perform at a piano bar in Vancouver. And I thought, what would Adam Lambert do? And I kind of like became him for a few years. And I was able to manifest a record deal because instead of when the record labels were turning me down for being too theatrical, instead of going, okay, I guess that's the case, I just sort of channeled Adam Lambert. I said, well, thank you for your feedback. Is that something I could get an opportunity at working on? And then one record executive, Avril Lavigne's manager, took me out for dinner. And halfway through, he's like, you know what? I like you. I'm going to offer you a record deal. And I thought I was crazy for doing this. So then when I came across your work many years later, I was like, oh my gosh, a Harvard trained psychiatrist is talking about the technique that I used. And so I wanted to kind of get into the nitty gritty of that today.
Sure. Well, so I wrote about psychological Halloweenism in Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, for lots of different reasons. One of them was that I wanted people to understand that sometimes we think we cannot solve problems because we don't have the cognitive capacity to, when in fact, one of the problems could be that you're trying to solve the problem as your ossified version of yourself, and that maybe you can change the self. And I came up with that term based on a study that showed that when you gave people a creative problem to solve, if they took on the identity of a rigid librarian, they were statistically significantly much less likely to solve that problem than if they took on the identity of an eccentric poet. And by taking on the identity, I mean, like embodying it as you're describing.
Yes.
So to me, what was very remarkable about that was that how come when you embody a different identity, you can solve a different problem? Well, that's because problem solving is not just about logic. It's also about how you come to the problem. And if you come to the problem as someone who's not going to solve this problem, you probably won't solve it. But if you
Right.
come to it as someone who would solve it, then you're much more likely to solve it. And
Right.
so I think what you did in that record deal was say, well, I don't want to be this person who is not going to get a deal. I want to I want to be this person who's going to manifest this. And you ended up speaking from your strengths rather than your weaknesses. There's another construct, which is Ethan Kross and his colleagues have actually looked at this. When they figured out that if you're feeling uncertain or if you're in a situation where you're being interviewed and you're like, oh my God, I'm feeling so anxious, rather than saying, I'm going to crush this to try to pep yourself up, if you call yourself by name, you say, Will, you're going to crush this, it's much more effective. And part of that is that if you say, I'm going to crush this, your brain comes back with like, yeah, whatever, you're not crushing anything. But if you say, Will, you're going to crush this, it actually, there's a way in which we realize that there's this nervous part of us, but there's also this part of us that knows how to crush it. And
Right.
so it is kind of cool that what we think of as the self is not fixed, and
Mhm.
that the pronouns that we use can actually change the way we feel and the outcomes we have.
I love that. And I wonder if you used a bit of that when I was watching your TED Talk when you called Harvard from South Africa in your little dorm room and then were able to manifest literally going to Harvard Medical School.
I always tell people there are dots in life, and I call these meaningful dots. And in my final year when I was at medical school, I had done well, so they called me for this oral exam. And in South Africa, they invited an overseas person, and the overseas examiner was from NYU.
Okay.
And so when the examiner examined me, at the end of that, he said, I'm really impressed with what you're doing. If you wanted a place at NYU, you'd have one tomorrow, but I honestly think you should go to Harvard. And at that time, I was like, what's Harvard? I'd been looking at Oxford, Cambridge for a while, and the Maudsley. But I was like, where's Harvard? I don't know. And so it wasn't a linear thing. It wasn't like I planned to go to Harvard. I
I see.
also saw a lot of my friends. So there's a story before that I don't think I often speak about, which is that before I called Harvard from a dorm room in Stellenbosch.
Right.
But the way I got to Stellenbosch was I was standing next to someone at a conference in a game reserve who was I just fell in love with everything he was saying. And I was just sort of like, oh my God, who is this person? And when I ended up standing next to him when I was waiting for my car, I just thought, I just want to tell you, I just came to your talk. It was really amazing.
Mhm.
And he said, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I don't know what got into me, but I looked at him and I said, I don't know why, but I feel like you could change my life.
Wow.
Can you say anything to change my life? And he looked at me and laughed and was like, well, I don't know you, but like, what are you interested in? And I said, I'm really interested in the connection between the mind and the body, and I'm interested in what goes on in the brain when
Mhm.
people are feeling. And psychiatry is interesting, but I think we can take it forward in a different way. And he said, well, we have a Medical Research Council scholarship that's due tomorrow. We've never given it to anyone of color, and we've never given it to anyone who's even vaguely related to psychiatry. So if you do get it, it will change your life. But here's the application details. Why don't you apply for it?
Yeah.
And so I thought, sure, I'll apply for it. And I applied for it. And the following afternoon, he actually contacted me and said, congratulations and welcome to Stellenbosch, which was all
Wow.
Afrikaans speaking, which was my second language at the time. And I was sort of like, how am I going to man? Like, what did I do? But it was that serendipity and that sort of groundedness in the reality of my feeling so in love with whatever he said that I just felt like I had to admit to my connection to him. you
Right.
know, and then I think so eventually it was just on a random day, I was like, that guy said Harvard, maybe I should check it out. I had just gotten a response from the Maudsley, but the Maudsley had they were very delighted to, you know, admit me to their program, but they also said that they had a special program for people who were not from the UK. And I was like,
Okay.
no thanks. Like what? And so I thought, well, let me just give Harvard a chance. And so when I eventually, called, I think, I mean, I've never done that again, that kind of thing, and I've never actually recommended to someone that they just call Harvard because so many things were aligned on that day. The person on the other end happened to pick up the phone. He was the head of the Department of Psychiatry after I got through to him. And, he said, just send a letter. And so I sent a letter and then he circulated it. And then someone called me and interviewed me. And then I get this FedEx saying, congratulations and welcome to Harvard. But what I've always said to people that the most remarkable things in my life have not necessarily happened from planning.
Right.
Now, of course, I had to do well in school for them to look at that. So there was planning involved. I had to call them, I had to talk to them. So there were actions involved. It's not like I was manifesting it from the sphere. But I think what I wasn't doing was blocking myself with doubt. Because if you said to me, hey, so I should just call someone randomly at Harvard, I was like, no. Like even when I was there doing research and I wanted to get into the residency program, the residency training director loved me and was very nice to me, but he said, listen, you're not going to get in because we only take 8 people in the first, 6 people in the first year, 2 more in the second. Um, they're going to be American candidates applying. There's no way there's not going to be 6 American candidates who we're going to be more comfortable with because we know how they've trained.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, well, what should I do? Why don't I just be fully myself, which I think is part of the theme of what we're talking about. And
Hmm.
so I won a poetry contest. I did a bunch of things in music as well. I did a whole lot of things, and then I applied to present this research that I've been doing, and so all of it came together. And they eventually called me and said, "Hey, apply because we think there is a chance." And when I interviewed, I remember distinctly saying, "Well, I don't really want to come to a place where I'm wondering if you want me. And I know you're not allowed to say that you want me, but I'm intuitive and I can feel it."
Yeah.
So it it took a lot to say those kinds of things. And I'm not always without doubt. And sometimes if I'm in a shakier state of being. But I think if there's anything that anyone who's listening to this can take away from this, it's that within every person, there is another version of themselves that is capable of achieving what they want. And if they care to tap into that version of themselves, they will think differently.
Yes. Amen. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I've got some specific questions about this technique. Um, how did you first discover or conceptualize this idea? Like, when was
Well,
the
when I,
first time you realized that it was a thing?
well, I've never really thought that. I mean, I don't know when the very first time was, but where my mind goes to is before I started school, I had a cousin who was at university, and she would enroll me as an actor, and
Okay.
so and I had these really small roles, like Baby Mowgli, sort of had no words, but would just sit in a diaper, and then I felt like I had to learn all the words and be this new character, and look a different way. So I think acting definitely and I did that for a large part of my life. So acting definitely makes you aware that you can take on a different character. And
Yes.
I think in my own life, I don't feel like I'm one thing. People always ask me, like I think when we talked about this before, it's sort of like, well, yeah, I am a psychiatrist and a brain scientist, and I work in biotechnology across medicine, looking at drugs in early stage development for cancer, heart disease. But I also pioneered a field called neurocoaching. I just wrote a musical, and I
Yeah.
co-founded tech companies. And people are like, oh my God, how do you do all that? Well, because there's no how.
Yeah.
Like I think if you ask, one of my favorite or why do you do that is the other thing. One of my favorite poems is by E. E. Cummings, who said, "When man determined to destroy himself, he picked the vase of shell and finding why, smashed it into because," which is a little bit of a mind bender. So, well, what was he talking about? Well, he said there was something destructive in people trying to ask the question why and give an answer based on something that preceded it. There's something about living into the why.
Hmm.
Because people make up all kinds of reasons for why they can't get what they want.
Yeah.
Like, well, I guess I was too schmaltzy, so I'm probably not going to get the record deal. Well, I guess I was 70 something out of some thousand. Well, I'm not sure. Probably won't. It's like, well, everyone we know who's had amazing success has had major rejections and has major but they didn't stop at those rejections.
No.
So, I think that of course it's human to feel sad about a rejection, but at some point, if you can just focus on your own momentum,
Yes.
on your center of gravity, which is, by the way, this default mode network that I talk about in Tinker Dabble Doodle Try. This is the self network in the brain, and people have referred to it as the brain's center of gravity. I think a lot of your work has to do with helping people reconnect with that center of gravity within themselves by being more fully who they are. And if you
Yes.
ask me, like, why are we speaking, in an existential sense, it may be through Instagram, but I think we probably are both similarly interested in helping people connect with something that they truly are. And that doesn't have to be a static thing. It
Yes.
could just be what is.
Totally.
It sounds so easy, but it's really not that easy. In my leadership work, I often talk about my favorite definition of leadership is Warren Bennis's definition, which is becoming a leader is synonymous with becoming yourself.
I like that.
It's precisely that simple and also that difficult. And I
Yes.
people like you and I are in the world because we're interested in facilitating that process. And
Mm.
nobody, I mean, I definitely can't claim to be all the different versions of myself that I could be, but I am enthusiastic about continuing to discover those parts of myself.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, and with the whole Canadian Idol thing, I'm glad it didn't work out. Canadian Idol wasn't the type of platform that American Idol was. We don't know anybody who's won Canadian Idol who's actually gone on to have a career in music. It wasn't aligned for me anyway, and it was part of my journey. And I love what I get to do now. I get paid to sing naked on stage. I did a show at the Vogue Theater in front of 4,000 people recently where I was singing Leonard Cohen songs naked and then teaching testicle breathing from my teacher Montauk Chia. So I just love that we live in a world now where you don't need a record deal or a TV show because we've got the internet and you can kind of just do you now.
Yeah.
And then that makes me feel like back in the day, I thought I had to do things a certain way and it did kind of work, but it's so much easier now to just be myself. Like my mantra is I get paid to be awesome. The whole embodying Adam Lambert thing was a step, almost like maybe a crutch that I used to play bigger than perhaps what I was used to at the time. And now I've kind of gotten rid of that crutch and I'm just myself. Sometimes I'll use psychological Halloweenism almost as like a kickstart. So say I'm like puttering around my apartment and I'm not feeling very inspired to get work done. I'll kind of like embody somebody like my personal trainer or something. And like right away, I get this like inspiration and I feel kind of sexy sacred and I get
Right.
all this shit done. And then, so my question to you is like, how do you navigate between the role that you're playing to kind of kickstart your passion, and then not get kind of lost in that?
Well, so I think first you have to have a sense, you have an internal permission to understand that. But I think you learn a lot about how much in role you are most of the time when you observe other people. I was at a restaurant in London recently, and the waiter was like obviously deeply intelligent and very sensitive and had the most professional way about him. So he deliberately placed some kind of distance between us because I was at a private club. He was sort of treating me with what he thought was the requisite distance. And
Right.
so I just decided I'm just going to comment on it. So I said to him, I really appreciate the role that you're agreeing to take up, but I want you to know that in this exchange that we're having, I'm human enough to understand your humanity, and I appreciate that you understand mine. And I'm just curious about like how you feel when you're in role. We got into a long conversation about that, he kept on coming back. But since then, whenever I see him and he sees me. But we also know that neither of us is fixed, in any kind of identity way. So I think the first thing, when you say, well, how do you do that? The first thing is to recognize at a biological level that the self circuit is not fixed. It can be changed. And that you can reach the self circuit through a number of unfocused techniques. You can, doodling
Mm.
connects with the default mode network. Improvements in memory up to 29% have been demonstrated. There's a technique called positive constructive daydreaming, which is not just sitting at your desk daydreaming, but doing something low key, so that when you're doing that, you suddenly, instead of paying attention to what's outside, you start imagining something wishful and something pleasant. So running through the woods with your dog, or hanging out on a yacht on a beach, and then you let your mind go. Jerome Singer studied this in the 1950s and found that uh, positive constructive daydreaming can be really helpful for creativity. I
Mm.
think the biggest challenge people feel is we often hear people say, that's just who I am. And I don't, I think preference is interesting. Like there are certain things I think I prefer, but they're not really deeply rooted in me. Like I don't really like sushi. And when my friends would say to me, but I like tasty food, and my friends would say to me, you got to eat this. Like, this is so good. And I was like, just the way it looks and the texture, it's just like a bit much. And eventually, some of them would make me or convince me to eat the sushi. I'd eat it, and it was delicious. And so they would say to me, "So how was that?" I was like, "Incredible." They said, "I told you, right?" I was like, "Yeah." They're like, the next time we're out, they're like, "Well, let's have the sushi." I was like, "No, you have the sushi." And they go, "What are you talking about? You said it was delicious the last time." And I said, "Yeah, but I had to switch identities in my mind to be like a sushi loving person, and I
Right.
changed into liking that." But on a at a superficial level, it's interesting because it demonstrates my unwillingness to switch my identity. For some reason, I want to hold on to that identity, even though I know, objectively speaking, I've tasted sushi that's delicious.
Yes.
Uh, and I think for so many people, this idea of can I be this other version of myself that I want to be is left out of the picture, and that really is a problem. So Richard Boyatzis at Case Western University has actually asked the question of when are you most likely to get to your goals? And what he found was that people who just operate as their real selves, this is just who I am, they're always in conflict with what it is they want.
Yeah.
And what he recommends is that to change your life from what it is to something that you want it to be. His theory is called the intentional change theory.
Hmm.
You actually want to you want to first understand your ideal self. Like in my Nas.io account, I have a free ideal self guide for people to just go through the questions. And because I ask questions like, well, what's your preferred image of your life in the future? And what do you actually value? It sounds to me like you value authenticity, you value the courage, you value sharing those features with other people. Once you know that, you will be directed toward where you want to go. And if you look at the brain, in the brain, if you don't define the ideal self more clearly,
Mhm.
there's a constant conflict that you see in the brain between your real self and the ideal self. It's like, oh yeah, you want to make another $1 million a year, but no, you don't really know. You don't have the time to do that. And so your brain doesn't, it's not really freed up to pursue what that direction is. So my recommendation on that in terms of how do you make that change is commit first to an ideal self. And even if you don't use my guide, ask yourself in the future, what what do I want my life to look like at a personal level, at a professional level, at a sexual level? Like, what do I want my life to look like and feel like?
Yes, I love that. Makes me think of the desire map. Are you familiar with Danielle Laporte, the
Yes.
author?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I've used her stuff too, and it kind of resonates. Um, there are reports in things like dissociative identity disorder and bipolar. Different alters can show measurable physiological differences, even things like vision changes. And some people say like the iris might even look like it's a slightly different color when they switch roles. What do we actually know about that?
So I don't know a lot about that body of work or that literature, but what I can tell you is that when I've worked with people with dissociative identity disorder, when I trained at McLean Hospital, we had the first women's treatment facility, and there was this person who specialized in PTSD, and a lot of people with DID came to the hospital. So I got to work with a lot of them, and each of the identities, it was different for different people. Like sometimes I would look at them and be like, "You got to be kidding! Like what? You have another personality, or maybe you have another mood, and you don't want to admit that." And to this day, I still feel like people who with DID are uncomfortable with the varieties of selves that they can have, that they've got to make that a different person.
Interesting.
Whereas I think that it is possible to be different kinds of people. Like I don't wear the same thing all the time. I felt like wearing this today. Sometimes I wear shiny jackets.
You
Sometimes I wear
always have nice outfits, I have to say.
Well, I'm interested in fashion in general. I'm interested in clothing. I think self-expression is important to me, and it's sort of that's another interesting contrast because I'm like, oh, I like putting lots of clothes to express myself, and you're like, I like to take
Like
my
to
clothes
be
off.
naked. I was gonna be naked because I was like, no, he's a psychiatrist. Like, just put on a shirt.
So yeah, I'm just discovering all these sort of these what I would say would be more of the reason that we have come to that we've come together. But
Yes.
in terms of the physiologic changes, for me it's very believable because also with method acting,
Mm.
when you're acting, you can feel your physiology changing.
Yes.
Or like I think about a great scene is from Macbeth with the three witches. I still love taking on those identities. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? And then the other witch was, when the hurly burly's done. Different physiology.
I love that. Yes.
The set of sun. Like I think taking on a different character is not just changing your mind, it's changing your mind and everything that it's connected to, including your body. One of my greatest passions, the reason I'm now studying and advocating that people talk more about psychogenic longevity, is that the mind and the body are not disconnected. There's a tremendous amount of evidence to show that mindset significantly impacts immunity and inflammation. Optimists, for example, have 11 to 15% longer lives.
Hmm.
And people, so focus, optimism, um, having a sense of connectedness, all of these things actually matter. So when you say, is it possible that there are physiological changes when there's a change in identity? I would say highly likely, because I don't think that your physiology is independent of the new identity that you have.
Right. What do you think of Lady Gaga? First, I should also say I love your scarves. When you wear those big scarves, that is so cool. I just have to compliment you on that. When I see
Thank you.
videos of you with that, I'm like, that is a cool look.
No, I appreciate that. There's a particular way I've started to enjoy tying my scarves because it's in the tying of the scarf, but it's also in the completion of it. There's something about it that satisfies me. And it's
Yes.
funny you mentioned Lady Gaga because when you said the thing about you were too dramatic, I was like, oh, I wonder why nobody thought that about Lady Gaga.
Right. And I wonder if they what they would have said to her back in the early, like before that type of thing came back in vogue.
Right.
Who knows?
I think she's an amazing singer. I think her her ability to sing alone and sing with others is also really remarkable. I actually use an example of Lady Gaga when I am teaching corporate executives on how to build greater resilience or creativity. The video that I show them is a conversation that she has with Yale students, where she talks about the fact that she came to a point in her career where she was completely burnt out. And she was like, I just don't want to sing anymore. And everyone was like, what do you mean you didn't want to, like, you're such an amazing singer. Like, why would you not want to sing? She said, because I didn't want to like sell perfumes and I didn't want to like do things other people were doing. And so I eventually realized I had to say no to things. So when
Mm,
someone was like, do you want to do this thing? No, that's not my thing. And she said, the more I learned to say no to things, the more I recognized I was connected to my integrity. And I'd go home and look at myself in the mirror, and she used a few more expletives than I will, but she said, you I can connect to because I can go to bed with any night because you're for real. You're living a life as you."
right.
And it's a very provocative thing to ask, how many things in our lives are we saying yes to that perhaps we could say no to? Now, perhaps she had more advantages, so she could say no to more things. But I guarantee if any person in the world said, is there one thing I could say no to, we would find it. And it would improve the quality of our lives.
I
You know,
totally
but
agree.
I also really liked her relationship with Bradley Cooper. I His whole identity is so amazing on on film that it's a aside from being good looking, he has an aura about him that I think is pretty cool.
He came
And
to my yoga class. I was like, "What, Bradley Cooper?"
he did really?
I was
That's
ta yeah, and I was talking about self-love, and he was with a beautiful girl, and he kind of squeezed her hand, and he's like, "See, that's important. Love yourself." I was like, "Oh, that's so cute." I was like,
that
"Yes,
is
yeah."
no, and her partnership with Bruno Mars is also pretty
Hmm.
interesting. I think the fact that she ventured off into acting, I was disappointed that Hollywood didn't celebrate that as much as I thought they should.
Yes,
But Hollywood is complicated. And I also really admire her dedication to mental health initiatives and
Yeah.
her recognition. Um, Her current partner, I think, seems to be someone who she always thanks from the heart. And it sounds like he is able to be with her vulnerabilities so that she can express her deepest self, which is, I think, for all of us, our vulnerabilities and our strengths.
Yes, for sure. And what do you think of like her outfits and like she seems to throughout her career kind of really embody different identities and roles.
I relate. I mean, some people sometimes will ask me, they'll be like, "Are you costuming?" Or like when Halloween comes around, I'm usually like, maybe I should wear jeans and a t-shirt," because I
Because
feel
every
like,
day is Halloween for us.
yeah, every day is Halloween. It's sort of changing whatever you want to wear.
Yeah.
So, I think I appreciate her costuming. I think it does open up the door to a different kind of identity. And identity shifts. There's a thing called the Proteus effect, which they discovered in immersive environments. But when people take on, for example, if they're having trouble losing weight and they take on the identity of someone who is doing that, they start to behave like that person. So,
Yes.
I think identity from a cognitive perspective is important, but I think identity from a clothing perspective is important. Um, I think they're both important. The question is, where do you feel most comfortable in yourself?
Yes.
I mean, I really, I think I both appreciate, admire, and sort of wonder about. Do you not feel vulnerable when you're like the very first time you were naked on stage or in front of people? Did you not feel vulnerable at all? You were just like, "Well, this is cool because I'm me," or
It's so interesting. When I first performed naked on stage in Toronto, maybe in 2021, with Channel 5's live show, I was like, am I going to wear a kilt? Am I going to wear a blazer? And I was like agonizing over like, what would I wear for this like performance? And then in the wings of the theater, I looked at Andrew Callahan and I was like, what do you want me to wear? And I was like, I could just be naked. He's like, yes, please, please be naked. And like his friends were like, yes, like that'll be so good. It'll go viral. But for me, it was like taking off my clothes made me feel like a million times more comfortable. It's like the strangest thing. I don't know if it's from like all the times I've spent at Rec Beach because I wasn't always comfortable naked. But when I was studying psychology at UBC and sexuality, they have this massive naked beach. And I just had this impulse to go down between classes and like study down there. And I remember the first time I like took off my clothes, I was so kind of excited. I think I got a boner the first time, and I like took my psychology book and I put it on my lap. I was like, shit, that's not appropriate right here. Um, but yeah, it was like this kind of. It took a second. It took a few years, I would say, to kind of regulate myself to come into like a self-loving, juicy feeling naked state. But now I prefer it to wearing clothes, and it makes me feel more confident. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of people who like nude beaches would probably understand that, but I'm anticipating there'd be like many more people in the world who would want to know like what it takes. I mean, you were asking me how, so I'm thinking, what does it take to reach that level of confidence in public? To be like, I prefer being this way, so that's how I'm going to be.
What does it take? Yeah, it takes. I think it takes access to spaces where you can regularly be naked. Also, in my naked men's and co-ed workshops, just like years and years of seeing all these different naked bodies, you start to realize that, this whole pornographic image, most guys, they think their penises aren't big enough because they see all these injected collagen penises on Pornhub and then they compare themselves. So yeah, just being naked more often and seeing a plethora of different naked bodies really helps one feel more comfortable naked, I would say. And it's just there's not many spaces for that in our society. Like in the locker room, people are always like, like that. There are some like older men who just like walk around with their ball sacks hanging. And I'm always like, yes, we need more of that, but it seems like things have gotten. It's kind of like I see we're kind of being encouraged to be little chihuahuas instead of wild beasties. Like apparently the YMCA's in the 60s and 70s, it was all dudes and you had to be naked to go swimming there. And then over time, we go from these public showers, in changing rooms where everybody's naked and washing themselves, to now these individual stalls. It's very clinical.
Right.
It's very clean, and oh, we don't want to look at somebody else. So in my workshops, I encourage dudes, like when we're stroking our cocks, to like look at all the beautiful penises and make eye contact and like acknowledge that this is a sacred ritual that the Spartans did. So yeah, there's just different ways that I tackle that. Um, but yeah, it
Right.
feels so much to be better to be wild than to be like domesticated.
Well, I think what you're talking about, which I think is well, many things, but I think one of the things that I um, hear you say is that there's a fear of having a sexual response to somebody you don't want to have a sexual response to, or to have to somehow what I guess I hear both sides of the coin in what you're describing. To a certain extent, I feel like you're speaking to the fact that body parts are not necessarily always associated with erotic, and that sometimes it's just the beauty of what that is, and that
Yes.
context matters. Like when you were talking about the scrotum of older men, I
Mhm.
was thinking, well, there was a beautiful passage in E.M. Forster's biography in which he describes some of his earliest experiences evolving into his own sexuality. And one of them was when he was in a boat with this older man and he could see his scrotum from the side light of his pants. And he became it was so erotized because it was not overtly exposed, but he felt he was privy to the secret.
Yes.
So, to a certain extent, I think what we're both saying in different ways is that when you impose meaning upon the body, you can change the meaning of the body.
Yes.
And you can either think of it in an erotic way or not. You can either think of it in a fixed identity way or not. But once you realize that there's a dynamic world of experiences to be had mentally, and there's a dynamic world of experiences to be had physically, then maybe you relax a little into it. But I think we live in a world that's so obsessed with categorizing. It's sort of good. I always remark about this, like I feel like people like to claim a lot of the time that they stopped being religious and they started being scientific. And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, but you just took all your religious terminology into science, like good cholesterol, bad cholesterol.
Holy.
Like what?
So true.
What? Like, I mean, first of all, cholesterol has U-shaped curves a lot of the time. If you look at cholesterol levels in stroke, if it's too high or too low, it could reach that. But no, people don't want to and even understand the spectrum of cholesterol.
Right.
It's gotta be clear, black or white. And I think the lack of clarity makes people feel like they've got to further define themselves.
Mhm.
But when it comes to identity, the answer is not to always further define yourself. Sometimes it matters to be in this lack of clarity space, what I call the liminal space.
Yes.
Because in the liminal space, there are amazing opportunities for transformation. And
Totally.
most people skip over that.
Yes. And to your point about, like in the locker room and certain spaces and what's appropriate, like I teach dudes who are afraid of getting an erection how to develop what we call the self-sensory system so that if they notice the penis is starting to gorge in a place where they don't want it to gorge, they can shunt some of that energy from the penis and balls into the rest of their system. And you go from kind of lusting fear mode to like wild beastie mode in the change room, and it's a lot more comfortable to be naked because you have that control. um,
Do
yeah,
you
so I was
think
gonna
do you
share.
think the initial thought they have leads to their erotic response, or do you think the erotic response creates the thought that maybe they are? Because sometimes that erotic response is from the brainstem. It's like bottom up, so you don't even realize it's happening. You're like, oh my
Right.
God, I'm having an erotic response. People have learned to train their brainstems not to have those responses from
Yes.
time to time. But if you don't train that, it's possible to respond erotically to the world. I mean, but
Yeah.
that's a lot of what beautiful poetry is about.
Totally. And it cannot just be genitally based. Like we can turn the whole body into a massive cock, and feel the eroticism. It's like I say most men have a very small balloon, just the penis and the balls to feel the erotic charge. Whereas in sexual kung fu, we train the whole body and the aura to be a receptacle for that sexual energy. So you've got a bigger surface area to work with. So it's more comfortable to hold more sexual energy and explore it in different ways rather than just like an erection and then come shooting out, you know?
Well, I see that energy a lot in sports, in accomplished sports people, where
Yes.
they channel all of that libidinal energy into the moment of performance. And this whole idea that you can embody erotic energy is also about embodying libido, which is
Yes.
so many different kinds of energy. And when you embody that libido, it can really fuel your desire to win. You know,
Yes.
and I think I noticed this on the tennis court the other day when you were speaking earlier about sort of, I think you were alluding to commitment to movement or your body.
Hmm.
I noticed that some of my forehands got better because I just became committed to them.
Right.
And I was like, why have I been not committed to my own forehand? Like I'm hitting a ball, I'm hitting a forehand. Like what, where was I? Like what, I was caught in the throes of automatic living. And
Yes.
you always have to remind yourself from time to time that there are pros and cons to, you know, automatic living, but I think very few people recognize the cons, and which is why they're stuck in habit or in an ossified identity,
Hmm.
you know, because they're not moving forward with their lives
Yes. And
or
again,
up.
that psychological Halloweism can be kind of like a kickstart. If I'm not feeling sexy, if I embody somebody I think is sexy, that libidinal energy can get charged up. And it's like I go from being totally uninspired to wanting to work on my forearm or be more specific. Um, do you know much about method acting? I'm super curious sort of about the how does a really good actor do method acting and at the same time include a bit of themselves within that, and what's the balance, like what works?
Well, I don't know a ton about method acting, but what I do know is the people I've seen who were method actors and how they struggled with exactly what you're talking about. That on the one hand, you go into the role as you.
Hmm.
And then the paradox is that you've got to lose the you that's you and take on the identity that's the other person. Now, I first encountered this. I used to fly to Los Angeles to take screenwriting classes from Boston for sort of, I don't know what got into me, but I just felt like I had to. And when I took those classes, I realized that actually screenwriting is a lot like psychiatry, like because you've got to get into the personality of the person so much. Like there'd be our assignments would be things like Joey is from the Bronx and is the butler at this house. He answers the door and he says, "Good morning, Mrs. Jones." So write 5 pages about Joey.
Okay.
And so I'd be like, okay, the butler from the Bronx, hey, Mrs. Jones, how's it going? Like, and I think, you know, then you realize when you are writing up the character that you are also embodying that character. I think the best actors are able to take on that role either through method acting or something related to that. But I think in the most tragic cases, they lose their identities to that character.
Right. I'm thinking like the Joker, Heath Ledger,
Right.
maybe.
Yeah. Like, you know, I think in those instances, you've gone so far that you've lost yourself. And I think one of the reasons people are afraid of psychological Halloweenism is they're afraid to lose themselves. Except if you realize that you cannot lose yourself, you're more likely to find this other version when you need to. And so maybe what you can do is start in small doses.
Yeah.
Say, I'll try to problem solve on this one thing I want to do. But
Like
today
set
I'm gonna,
a time limit, maybe.
yeah, like if I said I've run corporate seminars on this as well, and it's amazing to see the results. Like, you know, people will take on characters that they really don't like, and then they'll say, "Oh, I'm stuck." And I'll say, "Well, why did you take on the character?" They said, "Because I just had to think of someone least like me."
Uh,
And so I thought of that person and then I got stuck, but they reach amazing conclusions. You know,
right.
like for example, if I were to say to you, if you had to embody Lady Gaga and what you know about her in her career, firstly, we probably don't know most things about her because whatever's known is just publicly observed. But we can at least say that she presented herself in outrageous outfits, her meat outfit being one of my
Yeah,
favorites.
I love that one. That's
Uh,
fantastic.
yeah, it was both like amazing and maybe disgusting and beautiful. It was all of those things.
Totally.
Um, and so if you ask yourself that, you'd say, well, let me just identify five characteristics of hers that I do not have. The courage to wear something that's outrageous, um, the courage to take on a certain character where she's obviously in disguise, where
Mhm.
people are intrigued by the fact that she's in disguise, someone who talks about her trauma openly, someone who, there are these interviews with Oprah where she's talked about this, someone who, uh, you know, talked about how she appreciates her current partner. I mean, you can come up with a list of things and then say, well, let me choose two of these things and try to do them myself.
Mm.
And I think if you try to do that, it's much it makes you feel better because then you don't feel like you're completely taking on, an identity. I One of my favorite things to do is I don't smoke, but there's a part of me I really like the action of smoking. So I love faux smoking if I'm with someone because I just like the feeling it gives me. It's a stance, it's a drama,
Right.
you're communicating something that's so much more effective than if you were not faux smoking. So, and I also like faux putting the cigarette off. Just something about it is so being able to own that action in the moment is it's we lose the ability to play. I'm actually about to be affiliated with the National Institute for Play, but where they
Cool.
do a lot of serious work on play and the importance of play in helping the brain develop.
Yes.
So often, people will say, "Well, I don't know how to do that," and I'm like, "Well, I don't know. When you were a baby, did you need to go to an Ivy League school to learn how to walk? Did you say, no, I'm not going to go. I need to go to Harvard to learn how to walk. No, you learned in your own way. And there are so thousands of different ways that children learn how to walk because they're not looking at an owner's manual and they're not asking somebody how to, they're looking for a response. They hold on to something and they're like happy and they fall, they learn. But this intrinsic intelligence has never been more important. Like with the onset of AI, where you're not going to be able to keep up with the cognitive developments, I think turning back to your intrinsic intelligence is going to be one of the most important things that every person can do for themselves.
Amen. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I'm getting the feeling that, yeah, it's like, it's really just in this new Aquarian age, it's really just about being yourself and then giving yourself these little segments of time to doodle or to do a bit of psychological Halloweenism, but to really spend that time getting to know and own yourself, which leads me into like the whole idea of meditation. I know you're familiar with things like the different stages of meditation.
Mm.
Um, do you meditate? What style do you recommend? What works for you?
So I do meditate. I do transcendental meditation.
Oh, cool.
And I did it because I told my brother I thought it was ridiculous when he introduced me to it. And he was like, well, you're a scientist, so why don't you try it for 3 months? And if it doesn't work, don't do it.
Yeah.
So I tried it for 3 months and it completely changed my life. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, how is this? And that's not a typical story about TM,
Yeah.
but my grades all went up. My personal life, everything just was remarkable.
Mhm.
So, and over the years, I have found meditation to be extremely important. Sometimes when you have a speaking gig and you can't sleep and you didn't rest all night, just having the 20 minutes of meditation is
Mhm.
a great replacement in the moment for that. But I don't think, there's a lot of scientific evidence showing the efficacy of transcendental meditation.
Mhm.
One of my favorite studies is a study that showed preliminary positive effects for transcendental meditation. TM was able, people who are long-term meditators were able to upregulate, meaning turn on all 49 genes associated with inflammation. And
Whoa.
we were able to downregulate the genes associated with oxygen carrying capacity and immunity. So TM has a lot of positive physiological sort of, effects. In addition to that, mindfulness meditation has been shown to be particularly important. And that is just simply with TM, you have a mantra that you're focusing on. With mindfulness meditation, you simply focus on your breath and you close your eyes sitting up in a seat and you just pay attention to every inhale and exhale. And if your mind wanders, you gently bring it back like a flashlight to your breath.
Mm.
A recent study at Stanford showed that um, there was a form of breathing that actually where you breathe 3/4 and then you breathe to the top and then you breathe out, that actually just over 5 minutes can be more effective than mindfulness meditation.
Really?
Sometimes teach loving kindness meditation, where you are saying out loud, you know, may I be happy, may people I love be happy, may
Yes.
people I don't like be happy, and may people I don't know be happy. And
Right.
there have been studies that show that this has positive impacts on the brain as well. I
Wow.
was also taught a form of meditation that involves focusing on the different chakra points.
Okay.
So going from from the root chakra up the spine and going up to the top of the head. And I would say when meditation, right now, I don't feel like I'm as disciplined as I'd like to be. And it's something I'm going to change um, in terms of meditating twice a day. But when I was at my peak, and amazing things. And this is actually when I got into Harvard, I was doing this. I was
Okay.
meditating. I was meditating twice a day, and once in the morning for 20 minutes, once in the afternoon for 20 minutes, and I was doing at least one chakra meditation.
Okay.
And what always interested me about the chakras, which are, these, I think they're originally Hindu terms for locations in the body. They they correspond with a large set of nerves that coalesce at those points. So there's something about the way the body is constructed and being able to just take your attention up and then down that
Yes.
I think can be helpful.
And the
So
glands. I've heard like each chakra is
yeah,
associated with a gland, and yogis say the
right.
glands are the guardians of the house. You're mixing the blood and the chi in these endocrine glands, which can release hormones that make you feel sexy sacred.
Yeah, well, self-transcendence, which is what meditation is about, is so Reed has a has this nursing theory of self-transcendence in which uh, the transcendence is described as a pro. So you ask, well, how do I transcend myself? It's like, well, you can transcend by going inward to a deeper part of who you are. And it sounds like when you're naked on stage, you're actually facilitating an inward process. If when I'm wearing highly dramatic clothes, I'm facilitating an inward process. I think when you also transcend through relatedness, and there's a lot of data to show that relatedness is very connected to health span and mortality.
What does
That
relatedness mean?
so having close social relationships
Oh, I see.
can
Yes.
significantly impact your inflammation, your inflammatory markers, your immune markers. Uh, the other form of self-transcendence is upward. So it's what we're talking about, meditation, God, awe. These are constructs that people can engage with.
Yeah.
And then also hopping off the timeline. Like I have very little interest in chronology. I have very little interest in chronology. Like I feel like chronology is, Ellen Langer did studies at Harvard where she showed that when you put 70-year-old men in 50-year-old environments and have them behave as if they were in 50-year-old environments, they had better hearing, vision, and muscle strength.
So cool. And you were saying, sorry, with the TM, that has been shown scientifically to lower inflammation.
That's correct. Yeah.
That is so cool. Yeah, that's so cool. I know we're almost at time. Let me just see if there's anything that I have to ask you. Um, well, I guess like my only kind of nerdy meditation question is like, yeah, there's so many different styles of meditation. And then there's this one style like called dhyana, Dhyana, where you focus on like a guru or a rose so intently that you start to be imbued with the positive aspects of that person. Is that kind of like psychological Halloweenism in a way? Because you're like
Well,
receiving the good qualities of your teacher, for example?
I think there's similarities between the two. I think with Dhyana, so dharana is just pure focus. Dhyana is where you are allowing your energy to flow towards that object, and you are beginning to experience coming together. Samadhi is on the other end of that, and it's where you are fused. So does pure focus leading you to lose your boundary as your body? Can that help you connect with something greater? it can. And so I like that you're making this comparison between Dharana and Dhyana and psychological Halloweenism, because I think there are similarities between those states.
Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Have you heard of the practice of Ishta Devata, personal deity, where you
Uh,
kind of you do what you do the best you can. You imagine your teacher is kind of either you're becoming your teacher or they're like standing, for example, if you're doing a yoga class, they're at the top of your mat and you're performing your yoga practice as a dance to the best of your ability because they believe in you so much and you're honoring them by doing your best in the moment. That seems to be another technique that I've found helpful.
yeah, it is. I mean, it seems to fall into one of the limbs of yoga, which is the devotional
Ah,
form,
yes.
right? There's like, I can't remember the Indian words for them, but there's jnana in yoga, which is for knowledge,
Mm,
karma yoga, which is for action, and then there's a word for devotion as well. And
right.
I think devotion is another way of transcending yourself.
Bhakti. There we go.
Bhakti, that's correct.
Okay. That yoga training's coming back. Amazing. Well, this has been such a juicy conversation, Srini, and I really appreciate you being on the show. And where can people find you? I love your books on Spotify. I've been listening to them. Let us know where people can get more of your stuff.
So for now, you can get hear more about me. Really, on Instagram is where I appear pretty much every day. It's
Nice.
at Dr. Srini Pillay. I'm also at Dr. Srini Pillay on LinkedIn. And I'm on Meta as well, on Facebook, and also on Substack at Dr. Srini Pillay.
Wonderful.
And you can find me on my website, which is currently at Dr. Srini Pillay, but I'm switching to DSPmedia.ai, which I think is going to be a funny and fresh transition. Or you can find me on neurobusinessgroup.com. And my books, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try, and Life Unlocked, are on Amazon. And I hope that, and you can follow me on Nas.io as well, where I frequently send emails and building a community to figure out how I can be helpful to people.
That's amazing. You're my favorite psychiatrist.
Well, you're lovely yourself. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
having me.
you.
I appreciate
My
it.
pleasure. It's an honor to have you on the show. Cheers.
Thank you.